I walked into the charity gala that night with a gentle smile on my face, the kind of smile I'd practiced in the mirror all week, but my heart wasn't light at all. I knew those looks. His family never said things directly, but I'd heard enough whispers when I turned my back, seen enough coldly raised eyebrows every time I spoke. They didn't need to say I didn't belong. They just needed to stay silent at the right moments. Then, when his younger sister Delilah stepped onto the stage, took the microphone, and addressed the ballroom in a voice full of polished glamour, I knew something was coming. An attack without a name, but one that cut deeper than a direct blow. I took a deep breath. Not because I was scared, but because I knew. It was time to speak the truth. Before I tell you what really happened that night, make sure you stay until the end. Because this story, my story, isn't a fairy tale. It's a journey. A reminder that sometimes someone walks into a room uninvited, just to remind others that their presence doesn't need permission. My name is Alina Monroe, and this is how I turned humiliation into a stage, a ballroom, and a moment they will never forget. 3 years ago, Chicago welcomed me with a bone-chilling rain and a life spinning in ways no one could have expected. I had just come out of a presentation with a potential client portfolio in hand, blazer crisp. And then just as I tried to dodge a puddle on the sidewalk, a man in a gray suit stepped right into it. Water splashed, soaked my documents, my clothes, and my only hope for that afternoon. He turned back. Not to give a rushed apology or pull out his wallet like others had done, but to say, there's a coffee shop 3 blocks from here. Do you have 2 hours? Those 2 hours stretched into sunset and into the months that followed. His name was Julian Prescott, but at that time, I only knew him as the man who made me laugh until my cheeks ached in a tiny cafe in Old Town. I didn't know he was the CEO of a tech company valued over $1 billion, and he didn't know that I, the girl with rain-soaked gray dress, had grown up in the South Side slums, where my mother worked 3 jobs, so we wouldn't go to bed hungry. We started with late-night drives around the city, talking about dreams, fears, and things we'd never told anyone. I never thought I'd fall in love with someone from another world. But love doesn't ask for an address. It only asks, do you still believe in yourself? I remember so clearly the day Julian looked me in the eyes. His voice lower than usual. Gone was the humor we shared on late-night dates, replaced by something serious, almost pleading. Alina, I need you to be ready for something. My family won't understand you. They won't understand us. Not because you're not worthy, but because they're trapped in a world where everything is measured by last names, degrees, and plaques on walls. I paused, then smiled slightly. So, are you giving up? He shook his head. I'm in love with you, and the only thing I'm afraid of is seeing you hurt by their ignorance. I should have listened. I should have stepped back, asked serious questions about living with a family that didn't want me. But back then, I was in love. I believed in what every young woman once believed, that if you're smart enough, kind enough, successful enough, you'll earn acceptance. I was wrong. I forgot that some walls don't fall with kindness. I didn't realize that the pride of the wealthy doesn't need a reason to look down on others. And I never imagined that the name Alina Monroe could make people frown just because it didn't belong to some lineage etched in gold at the gates of an elite university. It took me nearly 2 hours to choose a simple navy dress, modest, the kind high society mothers consider safe. I wore a pair of pearl earrings my mother had left me, and modest heels just formal enough, just painful enough to distract me from my nerves. That night, Julian's family estate in Lake Haven glowed with warm yellow light, as elegant as something from a luxury interior magazine. The door opened, and there stood Florence Julian's mother looking at me like a piece of furniture delivered to the wrong house. She eyed me from head to toe, lips curling into the barest smile. "Oh, you're Julian's friend," she emphasized the word friend, like a quiet reminder that I was an outsider. Delilah Julian's sister didn't bother with manners. She was 28, 2 years younger than me, yet she carried herself like she'd lived 10 lifetimes of cocktail parties and private ballet classes. "Alina." She repeated my name like it was an unfamiliar dish. "Interesting. Is it short for something?" I smiled. "No, just Alina." My mom said, "The name was for someone who knows how to walk against the wind?" "Charming," she smirked. I didn't need to look around to know the dinner was going to be longer than expected. I spoke about my consulting firm, the projects I'd done with major corporations. Florence nodded eyes, never leaving her wine glass. "Small and medium businesses are the backbone of the economy," she said. But the way she stressed each word made me feel like I was a corner store. I didn't say anything, just swallowed hard and smiled. 8 months after that evening full of polite smiles, Julian knelt down in the garden where he'd planted lavender himself. In his hand was a simple ring. The stone wasn't big, but his eyes held a universe of unconditional love. I said yes, without hesitation. I believed that once we became husband and wife, the distance would close. I imagined shared dinners, warm embraces from my future mother-in-law, and a Delilah who could smile with sincerity. But when the wedding day arrived, I finally understood gowns and cakes can't patch up prejudice. The ceremony took place at a lakeside estate where the flowers were shipped in refrigerated trucks from Italy, and a string quartet played classical arrangements as I walked in. Everyone smiled, everyone raised their glasses. But I still saw the same looks from the tables in the back where Florence and Delilah sat. I didn't expect them to love me right away, but as I passed by the bar, I overheard Delilah say to a relative, "Well, at least she's pretty. Who knows? Maybe Julian just wants kids who can dance to a rhythm." I froze, not because of the subtle racial undertone in her jab, but because it came on the very day I thought they'd accepted me. I didn't cry. I didn't lash out. I turned away and continued the reception. But something cracked inside me, because I realized to them I wasn't a wife, I was an intruder. After the wedding, I thought I had passed the hardest threshold. I was wrong. The early days of being Julian's wife were filled with a mix of tenderness and isolation. At work, I was signing new clients. At home, I was learning how to dine alone at tables where no one saved me a seat. Florence still invited Julian over for dinners every week. Somehow I was never told. When I asked, he'd say, "I thought Mom had told you." Delilah posted photos of family gatherings online. I saw myself missing from every frame. No texts, no invitations. And whenever I did show up, they'd talk around me like I was invisible. I began to question myself. Was I being too sensitive? Was I failing to adapt to their world? Julian was torn. He loved me, I knew that. But he also loved his family. And when they mocked me, ignored me, or left me out, he would just squeeze my hand gently and say, "You know, they're just not used to someone like you." Someone like me, I once thought success would be enough. I had my own firm. I created jobs. I'd passed classes where professors told me I'd never keep up. But no achievement could shatter the velvet-coated stairs that cut like blades. I began to fall quiet more often, but deep down I remembered what my mother once said. You don't have to shrink yourself to fit into a seat someone else was never willing to offer you. It all started on a Wednesday morning that seemed just like any other. Julian had forgotten an important folder at home. He called me, his voice rushed but gentle as always. "Could you bring it to the office for me? It's for the strategy meeting." I thought I was simply helping my husband. But as I stepped into the office where the meeting room door happened to be slightly ajar, I saw Julian, his mother and Delilah huddled closely over thick pages filled with charts and figures. The air was dense silent, like someone had just announced something catastrophic. Florence was the first to look up, offering a short, tight smile. "Oh, Alina, thank you for bringing that. Perhaps we should continue this meeting later." I nodded politely, but just as I turned to leave, a corner of the document caught my eye. Bold red text read, "Projected cash flow deficit Q3, Q4. That wasn't just a number. To others it may have been meaningless, but to me, a woman who'd helped guide dozens of businesses through crises, it was clear they were in trouble. Serious trouble. That night I began paying closer attention. Delilah suddenly moved back in with her mother, claiming she wanted to be closer to family. But I knew her downtown apartment had vanished from real estate listings. Florence stopped wearing her usual sapphire jewelry. Julian stayed up later more tense than usual, but always insisted everything's fine. And I, whom they once deemed too unqualified to understand the legacy of this family, was the only one who could read exactly what they were trying to hide. Because numbers don't lie. Only people pretend nothing's wrong. The invitation was printed on luxurious paper, gold-edged, embossed in metallic font. Just one glance, and you knew this wasn't an event for outsiders. "You don't have to go," Julian said as he saw me holding the card. "I know these types of events. They're not easy for you." I stayed silent for a moment, then replied with the calmest voice I could muster. "But I'm not an outsider. I'm your wife." I was tired of asking for permission to show up in the life that was supposed to be mine. That evening I chose a sleek black gown, minimalist cut but boldly structured. I wore the earrings my mother had saved for a special day, and I walked into the ballroom like I belonged. The banquet hall shimmered under crystal chandeliers. Classical music played softly. Laughter rose from clusters of people wearing watches worth more than most people's annual salaries. Florence and Delilah were in their element, floating from circle to circle, leading Julian around, shaking hands, introducing him, smiling with just the right amount of charm. I followed a few steps behind. No one looked back at me. I stood quietly by the silent auction table, staring at items that cost more than a full year's salary of the people I once volunteered to advise. All I could think about were the financial statements I had read, the money they were bleeding, and how they were still performing as if everything was flawless. Then came the speeches. The hospital director gave thanks. A few benefactors took the stage. Until Delilah stepped up to the microphone. She smiled, turned to face the room, her voice clear and polished, her gaze glancing over me as if by chance. Not everyone understands the weight that comes with privilege. Not everyone has the discretion to protect a family's reputation when stepping into a world that isn't theirs. I felt my breath slow, as if the room suddenly shrank. As if all the years I had worked, all the battles I had fought, had just been reduced to a single condescending sentence. But this time, I didn't look away. I stood up, quietly, decisively, and I said, "Excuse me, may I borrow the microphone for a moment?" The only sound was the click of my heels echoing across the floor as I walked toward the stage, steady, calm, and as heavy as the years I had spent walking alone. Delilah froze. The confident smile faded from her lips. She looked at me, then at her mother. Florence started to rise, perhaps to protest, but I had already taken the microphone with every ounce of poise and resolve I had saved up over the past 3 years. I hadn't planned on speaking tonight. I began my voice carrying through the room without a tremble. But when someone is misrepresented in front of hundreds, sometimes silence is no longer politeness, it becomes complicity. I took a deep breath. Then began the story. There was once a little girl who grew up in a makeshift housing block in the south of this city. Her mother worked 3 jobs at once and still couldn't afford both the electric bill and food. They chose food and studied by candlelight. I looked around. Even the most extravagant gowns had stopped rustling. Hands holding champagne glasses froze mid-air. That little girl was told she didn't have the background for advanced classes, that she had no connections, no relatives in the field. But she studied anyway. She worked 2 jobs a day and held on to a single dream. I lifted my head and looked directly at Delilah. That little girl was me. Whispers began to spread through the crowd. I didn't stop them. I let the truth build just like the quiet weight of a story that doesn't need defending. I started a business with just $500. I've advised dozens of Fortune 500 companies. I have 15 employees and features in Forbes. But the thing I'm most proud of, it's not the money. It's that I never bowed to people who believe a person's worth is measured by their surname, their bloodline, or their seat at a dinner table. No one said a word, and I wasn't done. I let the silence settle like fine dust across the chandelier-lit room full of poised masks and polished manners. Then I continued slowly, clearly leaving no room for misunderstanding. 3 months ago, when I happened to see a forgotten document on Julian's desk, I realized something. This family wasn't just in trouble. They were teetering on the edge of complete financial collapse. I heard the first murmurs ripple through the audience. Some eyes turned toward Florence. Others flicked to Delilah, who now sat pale as if her crown had just been snatched away. 70 years of legacy was sinking due to mismanagement and failed investments. The Lake Haven estate was fully mortgaged. The Aspen vacation home already sold but still leased back to maintain appearances. And the charity fund, the very one we're gathered here to support tonight, is bone dry. A gasp came from the front row. Still, I didn't stop. I'm not saying this to humiliate anyone. I say this to make one thing clear. When I discovered the truth, I didn't laugh. I didn't walk away. I quietly met with partners. I reached out to investors. I opened doors to new deals. But in the end, I inhaled deeply and released the one truth no one in this room had seen coming. I wrote a check. $50 million from my personal account, under the name of a private firm called Phoenix Holdings. Delilah clutched the table to stay upright. Florence's jaw dropped, and Julian still sat frozen like a statue. But his eyes were locked on me as if he was seeing me for the first time, not just as his wife, but as the woman who had quietly saved an empire his family was unknowingly destroying. I didn't buy the company. I didn't seize control. I erased the debt because I wanted to preserve the dignity of the family of the man I loved. Even though for 3 years they did everything they could to strip mine from me. And in that moment, the entire room filled with people who used to pass me by without a greeting was completely silent. You had no right to interfere with our finances. Delilah shot up, her voice trembling but still clinging to a mask of pride. I turned to her calm and unshaken. I didn't interfere. I salvaged. That answer landed like a slap, not loud, but cold and sharp. Before Delilah could respond, another voice broke the tension, deep, firm, unwavering. She's right. Julian stood. The whole room turned. He walked slowly to my side, extended his hand not to take the mic, but to hold mine. Steady, unashamed. Alina has endured indifference, dismissal, and insult from my own family. And I let it happen. He looked straight at his mother and sister, his gaze no longer that of a son dodging conflict, but of a man finally taking responsibility. I should have defended her, should have stood by her at those early dinners in the face of those silent, belittling stares when she was left behind, but I stayed silent. And tonight, before all of you, I say it, I'm sorry. He turned to me, eyes softer now. You didn't just save the company. You preserved the dignity of my family, not with money, but with grace. By choosing silence when you could have condemned. By loving someone no one else in my family had the courage to love back. At that moment I knew, not everything could be repaired in one night, but at the very least, the apology had been spoken, publicly, clearly, beyond doubt. I looked at Delilah, then at Florence, who now sat motionless, stripped of her usual composed demeanor. I forgive you because I love Julian, but from this day forward, if you want me as part of this family, I don't come seeking tolerance. I come expecting respect. A few weeks after the gala night, I received a simple email with the subject line, "We'd like to meet you, Florence and Delilah." The meeting wasn't held at their house, but in my office. A small gesture, but one that said a great deal. They came together, no lawyer, no flowers, no performative congratulations. Just two women who once stood behind walls built of prejudice, now making their way through. I owe you an apology. Florence began slower than I'd ever heard her speak. Not just for the things I said, but for all the things I didn't say and let linger. Delilah looked at me, and for the first time there wasn't a trace of arrogance in her eyes. I saw something in you that I've never seen in myself. A steadiness that doesn't need validation. I was envious, and I'm sorry. I nodded, not to dismiss the past, but to acknowledge the courage it took to face it. I don't need you to like me, I said. I only ask to be treated with decency, because I belong to this family. Not because of a title, but because I chose to enter it, care for it, protect it, and forgive it. From that day forward, things weren't perfect, but they were real. Florence began inviting me to internal board meetings. Delilah started asking for my input on a project she was leading. And Julian, the man who once stayed silent, was now always the first to speak up if I was ever dismissed. Not to speak for me, but to remind everyone that I no longer had to speak alone. And me, I'm still Alina Monroe, the girl who studied under candlelight and walked into this world without anyone's permission. And if you've read this far, then I have something I want you to remember. You don't need a stamped invitation to enter any room. You don't need someone else's name to walk with your head high. And you certainly don't need anyone's approval to know that you belong wherever you choose to be. Because worth doesn't come from acceptance. It comes from presence with dignity. And sometimes, just standing up is enough to make the whole room listen. Thank you for staying with Alina until the very end. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed simply for being yourself, this story is to remind you, you're not alone, and you are enough, always.